Hello everyone, this is Aidy's Game Log, and this is recorded on the 2nd of December 2016. This is a new idea that I've got, of just feeding some of my thoughts and views on gaming into this electronic voice recorder thing that I've got. Rather than just sit down and make a video and compose thoughts and God knows what against the backdrop of some video game footage, I thought I would do something audio wise. I can't vouch for the quality. I don't know what this thing's going to sound like once I've connected it to a computer and processed the audio file into something that I can share on the web in some form or another. It's not a podcast as such. It's just me talking into this voice recorder for the sake of posterity, I guess. It just means I can be a bit more spontaneous. Quite often when I'm sat playing games, I have thoughts that occur to me, and by the time I've recorded the game footage and got round to making a goddamn video, the thing has just passed completely out of my mind. Though thinking about it, putting a video up against a backdrop of a black screen might not be terribly stimulating for somebody to sit and watch, so I'll probably throw some text up there. I'll have to see how this works anyway. But this is call it a prototype. I won't even call this episode 1. We'll call this the pilot show. And I don't know how long it's going to go for. But yeah, that's the idea behind this. So I hope you'll indulge me. It's just something that I've thought about doing for a while now. And believe it or not, just getting batteries for this device has been something that has been a hang-up for me. So I hope the audio quality isn't too terrible. I'm hoping that it's at least listenable and, bear with me. I'm sorry there isn't anything more visually stimulating on screen, but there just seems very little point in doing that. I might as well just edit the video footage up and sit in front of the computer microphone to do it. And then it will lose its spontaneity, I suppose. But one thing that sort of came to me today and actually compelled me to do this audio is just how much negativity there is out there with video games. I mean, I'm just sitting here now and thinking back through the many years that I've been gaming since the late 70s, and I can't think of an age where there appears to be more negative and polarized opinions in general towards something that is essentially a piece of entertainment. And I thought, why is that? Why are we in this position where people feel that it's okay or it's great to shit on something, even if that thing is a very competent, quality piece of software? Why is it people feel the need to go to town on it as if it's the most incompetently designed thing in the history of mankind? And over and over again when thinking about it, you try to look for consistencies. You try to look for patterns. And just going back through the different ages of gaming where there was a lot less negativity. Up until about 10 years ago, everything had a constant to it. That there wasn't really a games community out there as such. Now, there was probably one in a fledgling state on the internet, but it was kind of hidden away in forums and comment sections. But overall, there wasn't really what I would call centralized places. There wasn't the same type of activity in social media circles than there is now. YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure to some extent these things existed in one form or another. I don't know when they actually first hatched onto the web in the guises that they are now, but I'm pretty sure there were things out there, but they were a lot less common. And what we have now with this social media that we have, what we have is people's desires to share their experiences, to share their opinions. And so we've become exposed to a myriad of different personalities. If you think back to our childhoods, if you're of a certain age, most of our information that we digested about video games came from select sources, namely computer and video game style magazines. And therefore it was a very closed experience. It was a very hands-off experience. If you wanted to voice your opinion, you had to write a letter into the magazine and hope that it got published in the following month's letters section, and many of them didn't. It was no guarantee to get your voice heard. It was then at the discretion of whoever was editing the letters page, and they would just pick the ones they felt were the most interesting. And so therefore there was no guarantees. There was no guarantees at all that your voice was going to be heard by anyone. But now that's changed. The advent of social media has meant that you can put something out there and people can come across it at various stages. And that's especially true of making videos here on YouTube. YouTube is a very curious phenomenon for me. Simply because it's a mine of information, but a quagmire of shit, both at the same time. It's almost a contradiction in terms. It's fair to say that I've probably bought a great many games in the past few years, certainly, that have been panned in the media based on the coverage they were given by certain more balanced individuals here on YouTube. But there are also the flip side to it, and people that like to put negative content out there have cottoned on to the idea that negativity sells. If you go back to what the Angry Video Game Nerd did when he established himself with that character, when James Rolfe established that character, was by and large tearing games apart. And that was hugely successful, and I think that led people to believe that that was the only way to be successful, was to be contrary or to be overly negative and snarky, that those were the things that guaranteed success. And to a large extent they're probably right. We do like to be drawn as a species towards the wreckage. We do like to look at the wasteland, and there's a morbid fascination with it, in the same way that when one drives down the road and you see a car wreck at the side of the road, there's an almost irresistible urge to glance over, even if what we may see may be appalling and stay with us for far longer than we care to admit. It is almost that irresistible urge, that almost, how does one describe it? It's like a magnetism. So there is something to be said about the fact that as a species we are drawn towards the negative. Maybe it's some hangover from the past in our ancestry. In the primitive man, perhaps negativity was something that was a key component to survival, and our desire to exercise that devil in other forms of media and entertainment in a world where it's no longer quite as dangerous to step outside the front door every day as it would have been back in the Stone Age or the Ice Age or whatever. Not too many people get savaged by wandering saber-toothed cats these days. So maybe that is part of the human psyche that's to blame. But there's also people that do capitalise on it. And it comes from a base, really, that is false. I've watched James Rolfe videos, and he puts equally as number of positive videos up on his Cinemassacre channel as he does negative. And when you watch videos where he talks about the origins of the nerd, it was actually satire. That he was taking a very alternate view of games that he played as a kid, and for the most part it's satirical. He's nitpicking in a comedy fashion. It wasn't designed at any given point to be a conclusive, comprehensive, definitive review of a game. It was a piece of entertainment. And you've seen these various channels crop up, some of them totally almost borrowing his name, in the names of their channels and so on and so forth. They can't even stretch originality to come up with something that doesn't have angry in the title at some point or another. And their primary function is to just tear games apart because they want to be successful. They want to be the next big thing on YouTube. They want to earn money. They want to make a living out of something they profess to enjoy and love. And in order to do that, they have to sell their soul to the devil in an almost Faustian type pact, where in order to do the thing that they love, they have to be seen to be tearing it apart. And it's bizarre, because like these YouTube drama channels that have cropped up more frequently in the past couple of years or so, these things have a finite lifespan before they burn out. There is a lot of truth in the fact that the brightest flame burns quickest, and I find a lot more satisfaction in finding YouTube channels where people will talk equally as positive and negative about games. I think it's important to have a balance. I don't think that there's anything wrong with people who wish to be positive and display the more positive elements of this hobby of ours. I think there's a lot to admire in that. I think it's very important that we remember that we do this for fun, that we buy and play games for fun and entertainment, and to find levity from the trials and tribulations of everyday life. I think it's important that we remember that. But that doesn't mean to say that we have to say that everything is sweet and nice in the garden. We don't have to have a hive or cult mind type status where to question is wrong. We need balance. But some people don't have the balance. They just want to be negative. I don't think it's purveying balance in any way, shape or form if somebody posts something up on social media espousing their excitement for an upcoming game, only to have the first comment or first reply of somebody saying that it looks like a load of shit and other such wonderful negative responses. That's not formulating a balanced opinion. That is more pissing on somebody's chips because it's something you don't like. Personally speaking, I don't see the value in that. I think keeping your own counsel and maybe posting something on your own social media and not somebody else's, or replying to somebody else's with the sole purpose of sharing your negative view on things, is the way forward. It's hard to be positive at times because the games industry does give a tremendous amount of ammunition to the naysayers in terms of things that they do. One only has to look at the business practices of the modern games industry to look at how stupid it can be at times. But that is not something that is exclusive to the games industry. That's exclusive to nothing. It's something that affects all of entertainment. You look at the fact that certain shows on TV get shit canned, and yet they were phenomenal shows. You look at why do some movies get made and other movies don't, even though the other movie look to be clearly more interesting and better? Why do certain video games get 300 sequels and Valve can't even finish off the fucking Half-Life series? There is no logic to it, because the forces that tend to drive these things forward are forces that average people don't really want to sit and understand. That might be a very sweeping statement that I just made there, but I think most of us don't really appreciate why decisions get made and why they don't when it comes to things being made and things being passed by. I just had to take a swig of a drink there because my throat was drying out. That didn't really make much difference, but there we go. But no, I think it's important that we try at least to understand that this whole thing with the games industry is that people have a negative vibe with is not exclusive to the games industry under any circumstances whatsoever. It's widespread throughout all entertainment, because what we like is very subjective, and what we don't like is very subjective, and it's very hard to please everybody. Why do certain films get made? God only knows. Why did the Twilight movies ever get made? God only knows. They're not my cup of tea, but clearly there were a sufficient number of people out there that were excited by them in order for them to make umpteen of the goddamn things. But that's life, and it isn't a reason to be negative. I see a lot of people complain about remakes or reimaginings or remastered versions of games that only came out a few years ago, and sometimes it can be frustrating, I suppose, but I think you have to also understand that these games are not coming at the expense of new games, and remakes and rehashes are things which have been with us from the dawn of gaming. As a child, I can remember playing multiple versions of Space Invaders and Pac-Man across different formats. There were some that were clearly reimagining of Space Invaders because it had things in that wasn't in the arcade original. There were various versions of arcade games that were almost plagiarizing them but didn't share the same name, that were technically remasters, reimaginings or remakes. This cycle isn't new. It's just that we feel a bit more upset about it now, I guess, because it seems to have become more commonplace in the last 4 or 5 years, and it's a trend that really started in the last generation more than any other. But in theory it has always been with us. It always has been, and it's not unusual. I mean, just go back to the Sega Saturn, for example, with Daytona. There was 2 versions of Daytona released on the Sega Saturn within that same generation. There was Daytona, and then there was Daytona Championship Edition, which was a new and improved version of the same game. It had extra things in it. It was a remastered version. They improved the graphics and added in more stuff in the actual same generation of console. Both the Sega Saturn. People seem to like that though, because it was an improvement. Well, what is the difference now? I enjoy the fact that I've got a remastered version of Skyrim on the PS4 that looks and plays better than the one I was wrestling with in the doomed Xbox 360 version that just kept crashing. And it also contains all the DLC and everything else. Why is that not worth it? You know, every console generation brings in new gamers. It's somebody's first console. PS4 will be somebody's first console, young and old. And so why should they be denied a classic game that was from last generation? Is it fair that they too need to buy outdated hardware and buy a game that has been subsequently improved and remastered? Why? I mean, look at the Super Nintendo when that came out. Was it Super Mario All-Stars? That was basically a game that remastered all of the Super Mario Brothers games off the NES and gave them a Super Mario World makeover. Well, who was crying about that then? No one. It was a great idea. So why are people moaning now? Is it just just simply to get attention? Is it because they believe that these games are coming at the expense of new ones? Well, no, and I can give you a great example right now. Shadow Warrior by Flying Wild Hog, I think they're called. They remastered and released a version of that on the consoles and PC 3 years ago. It's a great game, by the way. You should be able to pick it up quite cheap now, and it's well worth it. But they have been able to make a sequel to that game, Shadow Warrior 2, which is already out on PC and is coming out to the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 next year. And I can't wait. Now, there's an example of the fact that the original Shadow Warrior was successful enough to make this studio feel that there was a market available for them to create a sequel. And Bulletstorm, People Can Fly, and making a version of Bulletstorm for the next gen consoles, or current gen consoles, should I say. I think calling them next gen when they're 3 years into their life cycle is a bit of a stretch. And I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's a great idea. I think that it enables people who missed it the first time round to be able to play this hugely underrated classic game that was so much fun to play. What's wrong with that? That could mean that we get Bulletstorm 2, which is something that I would really want and something that I would love to play. So what's the point in being upset about it? It's not at the expense of new IP. It's designed to bring revenue in to enable these companies to make new games. It's very difficult to get new games off the ground now without any evidence whatsoever to support the fact that it will be a success. One only has to look at what's happened with Titanfall 2. A game that has come out and, despite the fact that it's a fantastic game, has struggled sales-wise. There's no guarantee of success, and companies are becoming more frugal and prudent in where they throw their money these days, because the games market bubble, this AAA bubble that we've all existed in for a considerable period of time, is stretching to the point where it's going to burst. And nobody wants to be the ET of this generation. Nobody wants to be the massive budget flop that pricks the bubble that causes the industry to start to cascade into failure. Of course, ET wasn't responsible for the computer crash in or the gaming crash of 83 or 84, whenever it was. But it was part of a catalyst of events. And it was one of the more higher profile failures. And that can happen now. And no company wants to be the one that goes down in history as the game that did that. Companies are up to the eyeballs in investors and loans and God knows what other financial commitments that they have that need to be satisfied, whether we as gamers like it or not. That greasy wheel needs to be tended to. And they have to, otherwise games just don't get made. And that serves no purpose whatsoever. So these remasters are not replacing anything. They're enabling games to come out there. They're a great barometer, a low cost, low commitment barometer for people to be able to ascertain whether that game, whether a sequel to that game or a spin-off of that game or a game similar to that can be successful in the modern day audience. Because at the moment it's inscrutable. There have been high profile failures that the games themselves have been fantastic but just haven't found their audience. So I guess that's it for this first one. I think that, we don't have to be all happy clappy, all hands around the world, isn't everything great? But I think perspective is important, and I think at least trying to unzip ourselves from the angle and view and outlook of the world that we have as individuals, and try to look at things through other people's eyes in a sort of weird Jeepers Creepers creeper type way. That's probably not a good idea, but at least let's try to understand why certain decisions are made, and let's try to see the good in the bad and not the bad in the good. I'll catch you all later.